Today we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. Here we have St. Paul speaking in a very personal way, a way unknown in the first century. Only St. Augustine's Confessions could match the kind of intimate psychological portrait that the apostle presents to us through his letters, this kind of sharing that was simply not part of the literature or the way of interacting of that time. This too he transcended as he did everything else, including his zealous relationship to his Jewish faith. We have here a man who is liberated to speak in a new way, from a new dimension, if you will, of consciousness. We begin with the reading. So then, men ought to regard us as servants of Christ and as those entrusted with the secret things of God. Now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. I care very little if I am judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait till the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts. At that time, each will receive his praise from God. He speaks these incredible words, entrusted with the secret things of God. Consider for a moment what that might be referring to. This is transhuman, if you will. This is a knowing, an intuitive knowing that is enlightened from within, from the grace of Spirit itself. It is beyond our intellectual deduction or wisdom or genius even. It is something else, a knowing of the heart that is not self-created, although one must be fully open to it. It is a revelation that sacred things can be made known, that new levels of perception and understanding, which he calls the secret things of God, can be part of the human consciousness. This is something that in our modern culture is incomprehensible. Even our best quantum physicists would find unacceptable, except for the very few who rely on the deepest intuitions, the creative ecstasy that comes from a new insight beyond them. That is a hint of what this is suggesting, because these secret things of God suggest a capacity to understand from the divine perspective the reason we exist, the deep mysteries of life. This is a gift to those who have so worked on themselves, if you will, to be liberated from ego, to open themselves to this spiritual love of the holy. I think of some of the great ancient mystic teachers of Christianity, or of other religions for that matter. Rumi, for instance, the great poet, who in his moments of ecstasy wrote some of the most incredible poetry that humanity has ever known. Or perhaps even insights in a supreme vision quest, a sense that breaks us out of ourselves and into vistas, event horizons of insight that are completely beyond us. The important thing here is to realize that this is available to us, to those who seek this communion with God, this evolution, spiritual evolution of our nature. We find in a few special writings hints of this kind of insight into life, into purpose, into the activity of the holy, from those whose humility has made them transparent to the divine, for those whose devotion, whose self-giving, whose capacity for unconditional love has taken down all the walls of the mind so that something new comes through, an inner light, a radiance that sees things differently. He goes on to say that it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. Yet clearly, such gift of insight, such intuitive revelation can only occur to those who are utterly united around this way of being, who treasure and value what they are given, who recognize where it comes from, that it is the most important thing that can be found in life, who don't fall back asleep, who don't take for granted, whose life is a constant movement forward into the heart of God. This is proving ourselves faithful. And of course, in our imperfection, there is continual effort required, continual getting up again. But this suggests to us that there comes a time in our spiritual growth, maturing, where we quickly get up again, maintaining that recognition of our limitations and at the same time being set free into new dimensions of understanding and of insight that utterly transcend our fragility, our vulnerability, our limitations. This paradox of spiritual awakening and maintaining our unstable nature, our humanity, is the essence of our struggle, our great potential as spiritual beings incarnate in flesh, and our fragmentation psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, in our everyday life. This effort of uniting around a single aim is at the core of achieving this potential, of being initiated into the secret things of God. St. Paul goes on to say that it is required that those who have been given this must prove faithful. That is to say, must recognize the immensity of this gift and must make it their central purpose in life. It cannot be one thing among many, or a hobby, or a part-time activity. It must be at the center of all that we are, all that we do, all that everyday life requires of us. This faithfulness translates into a quality of awareness and attention, of vigilance that keeps us in that direction. He goes on to say he does not care how people judge him. And this is a very important statement, because all of us are prone to the opinions of others, the influence of others, pleasing others. But in order to accomplish this single-minded devotion to the sacred, to our true self, our true destiny. We must let go of that within us which seeks to be part of this world and seeks to be understood while walking a path that is by definition a solitary one. Not that others do not walk it, but it is so rare that sometimes one goes through a lifetime with no contact other than those who have lived before and left traces of this journey. Nevertheless, we are given the grace of knowing in our time that others exist who have tasted the divine, who live for it, and this is the hope of humanity. St. Paul says, I do not even judge myself. Now, this too is paradoxical, because we must know ourselves very well in order to achieve this unity of purpose. We must know precisely how fragmented we are, what aspects of ourselves want nothing to do with this, so that we can weaken them and put our focus and energy on that within which is focused on this purpose alone. As we mature, there is an integration where it becomes a second nature to live in all things, this consciousness of the divine. But to get there, through this vigilance, we must be vigilant over ourselves most of all. And yet that does not mean judging ourselves. The moment we do so, we change the dynamics of this process. We become weighed down by disappointment, anger, frustration, sometimes hopelessness, and this is the wrong direction. It is an objectively seeing our condition and what we must do that we continually move forward. St. Paul says, my conscience is clear. Here is a man called by some as the first mystic of Christianity, who knows that his life as a mature spiritual being is purified. And yet he says, I am not innocent. He remains aware of his vulnerability, his weaknesses, his troubles, his character. And therefore, in that beautiful state of knowing his nature, he nevertheless strives for that higher consciousness, that theosis, that unity with the holy, which is the path he has before him, which he calls us to in the name of the one who opened that path for humanity. He says, wait till the Lord comes. In other words, all will be dealt with and resolved in some way in due time, even if that time is in another dimension, in eternity, in the spiritual life beyond the body. That we are not to decide for ourselves what must be judged, but leave it in God's hands and continue our focus on where we are headed and who we seek to become. He says he will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts, so that our ultimate reckoning with what we have tried to do is in the heart of unconditional love. And that is where all is resolved. We are not seeking success, accomplishment on this side. We are just being faithful to that which we are given in the midst of uncertainty and mistakes and failures. Nevertheless, we remain faithful and do not judge the outcome, knowing that it belongs to another. In this way, we are freed to keep moving upwards in this spiritual awakening.